Hello, Revernauts. Revernauts? I'm not sure which sounds better. Let me know if you have an opinion. I am Chief Engineer Rever, back for episode 2. Hopefully this day we will be able to escape the atmosphere. Let's see what happens. I'm sure we'll be able to get in a flight or two. And if we come back as a bit of a reminder, before we left the last episode, we selected escape the atmosphere as a test and orbit around Kerbin. And if we can get, well, to do one, you need to do the other. So if we can get to orbiting around Kerbin, we will be in good shape. Hopefully we'll at least be, well, we'll be able to escape the atmosphere. But that will be our goals. So in order to do that, I would like to come in here and get us a few parts. And the part that I definitely want to get ASAP, because it'll save us some money from this point forward, is this survivability, because it gives us a few parachute options. Some of these other things are actually awful nice, more than you might realize. Having solar panels can definitely be, in any extended mission, you don't want to run out of electricity, and plopping a solar panel or two on your craft could be the difference between life and death. Once you lose all your electricity, you lose all your control, and you may or may not ever come back to Earth or Kerbal at that point. Now, it also will give us this heat shield, so if we do orbit and are able to come back, we won't burn up on re-entry, which is a fairly nice thing, because you don't need parachutes if you are just a flaming ball of Kerbals. Anyway, so we're going to get that first. And we have a little bit of a debate. These structural parts, they're fine, they're good, but we're not going to use them, so I'm not going to get those, even though they're relatively cheap. I don't want to. Science is sort of precious. That's why we upped our science. This modular wings is more for if you're doing airplanes, and I really want to kind of avoid that in this particular play. I've done it before. It's not my favorite part of the game. I like getting into space. We also have this stability, which would be nice, but there's really, for the most part at this point, the protective shell is nice. We'll get into that later when you're building fancy things. But really, most of this we're not going to use. The decoupler is like the one thing that I would really want. But I think at this point, we're really better off going with this general rocketry, because it's going to give us some different engine options. And that, I think, in these first early flights will give us some more flexibility as to how we build our craft, right? And without those, you're really limited, especially if you don't have the decoupler. But one of the reasons we would do the decoupler is because we would put things like this thumper on there, which would give us a really big blast into space. So, which would mean we don't want to use that big Reliant engine necessarily. We would just use a little engine. So, we'll see. Let's play it by ear at that point. But we are going to get this one first. We're only 0.2 science short of getting this 8 that we need for stability. So, if we accidentally get some science, we could probably we could probably go to the launch pad and do like a seismometer reading or something, and then get that little extra bit we need. Yeah, as a matter of fact, let's do that. It's a little bit cheaty. Let's come back to our vehicle assembly building. I don't know if it's cheaty. I mean, it is the game. You're not cheating the game. It's in the mechanics of the game. So let's just come and open. Yeah, this was the last vehicle, so let's just go to this one. And all I'm going to do is come over here to science. Okay, by the way, this flight computer, and if you notice we have this engineer redux, this is going to tell us more details, which I really like when you're designing a ship. Even though this is nice to be able to click that and open it, it doesn't give you like the max thrust. It doesn't give you quite the same statistics there. So in any event, but we're not going to, all we're going to do right now is just come over here and stick one of these things on here and hit launch, and we'll see what science we can do that makes any sense. So if we come over here and click on the seismometer, I'm going to hit perform all science, anything that's going to actually, so to see the seismic scan is going to give us 8 science. This is going to give us none. This will give us none, and that'll give us none. And that's because we've already performed for the most part, you can only perform most experiments once in a certain area. And this is considered the launch pad. So if we could land over here, this might be considered like Kerbal Shores or something, and then you could get more science. But I just wanted to do that. We can come up here and hit Recover Vessel, so it shouldn't have cost us anything. Sort of like the same way we started the last episode. So we'll get this back, we'll get all our parts back, and then we'll be able to come in here, and we'll be able to get that survivability. And we'll research that, and that's great, because that'll give us those decouplers, which really, I think, might be the difference between being able to orbit and not being able to orbit. Okay, so I want to scrap all of that, and I'm even going to scrap this barometer for the moment. And we'll zoom in to see what we have here. So we don't have too much more in the way of command, which is fine. We're going to do unmanned, oops, I meant to zoom out just a tad. We're going to do an unmanned probe at that point. Now what I want to do is see about the fuel tanks we have. And what we're looking for, if this is a liquid fuel tank, I'm not real familiar with these. These are kind of new, these procedural parts. See these probe parts. Squad means that it's made by the squad is the developer that makes the game. So this is what we're looking for though. We're looking for liquid fuel tanks. And these are kind of big. Like I don't necessarily, we just want to launch a small thing up there, right? So that's liquid fuel, which is like for RCS. Yeah, do we have a small, yeah, see that one's, yeah, it doesn't look like we have a small, the Oscar B, right? A little fuel tank, and then let's go over to the engines. And the Pomeranian is like it's actually pretty small. What's the other one that's, there's another one that you get like the Poodle or something like that that's really, really nice. Now, one thing to note about these engines, now that we have a few to look at, if you look, this one only has 4.2 kilonewtons at sea level, right, in the atmosphere of Kerbin. But when you're in vacuum, it gets 15, so it's almost 4 times as powerful, 3.5 times as powerful. So this is the kind of engine that you would want to use in the vacuum of space and then bring back. But now the other thing that we want to do here is, so does that make sense? So keep an eye out for that when you're putting these engines in. You wouldn't want to, I mean, this thing's tiny anyway, but you wouldn't want to blast off with it. This would be to do a little bit of fine tuning of our orbit, and then also, be able to exactly fine tune the orbit and at the same time return us back. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off, and I want to go over to payload. Where's payload? And we want to put on a little service bay so we can open up these doors, right? Let's zoom in. And then we can put a few experiments in here where they'll be a little bit more protected from the heat. And also, I think it makes the ship a little bit more aerodynamic. So let's come back to our science. And we want to put a flight computer in here, which will give us some oh, geez. Can I, here, let's flip that guy over. Let's just see. Can I, it's not letting me actually rescale that guy, is it? So we can put him on the side there. Yeah, that's a bit ridiculous. Yeah, I'm not sure what to do about that, but we're gonna live with it. So let's see, how big is this thing? And see, these things really kind of need to be scalable, huh? What does that mean? I don't know what verbose simulation log means. Yeah, maybe we put this guy on the outside over here. I'm going to hit E and spin him around. Q, no, W. There we go. Yeah, that looks quite silly. Another thing we want to do before I forget, well, you know what, let's finish up with the science. So at least that, putting that module in there gives us some. Now the problem we're going to have coming back is that these may burn up. as you may see. So let's go ahead. I'm going to put a seismometer into here because when we land back on Earth, we may be able to do a seismometer experiment. Right? We won't be able to do anything like that in space, but then we're going to have this. And then the other thing we could think about anyway is, do we have electrical? Yes. We can think about putting even just a small extra battery in here. Right? Now some of these things we could actually put on the roof of this thing, right? We could put them up there. But I don't think we're going to put too much in here because we already have a thermometer up here. So if we go back to science, we kind of have everything that science has to offer shoved on there. Now notice this doesn't count towards the cost at this point, right? Until we put this back on. So this is actually relatively cheap, but we're going to bring back and parachute back in quite a bit of this as long as we remember to put a parachute on it. Now I've always been a bit of a mystery to me, you know, with the costs of the different things. So all right, let's go in here, not payload, but thermal. Yeah, and how big is this one? Yeah, so there we go. So when that comes back in, if we can decouple from right here, then we will end up with just bringing this little bit back, which will be, this parachute will be plenty big enough. We could probably even bring more with us if we wanted to, but then oops, we need a decoupler. Now hopefully, do we have a decoupler that's at all the right size? No. Yeah, what does this one look like? No, that's the same size. A lot of them will tell you the diameter. Yeah, that's a hard point. Yeah, we don't want a radial decoupler. So as goofy as that looks, I think that's what we kind of have to go with. That's what we have, right? Close the doors. Yeah, that'll be our goofy little ship, but at least we have the possibility of decoupling. Now, we're also going to want another decoupler down underneath of here, right? So that we'll have a larger rocket that will hopefully get us all the way into orbit, or darn near, and then we can just use this one to do some fine-tuning and return back to Earth. And we'll decouple from there. So it's unfortunate we don't have the right size decoupler to make this all look a little bit better, but it's a game. All right, so now let's talk about underneath of this second decoupler. Let's go back up here, and we want to get some fuel tanks. Now, I went and searched on Google because I'm having problems with my Opera web browser, and found a Delta V map, KSP Delta V map. If you search that, and it will tell you how much change in velocity you need in order to get to each different location, right? I'm a little bit concerned. I'm a little bit concerned that we're not showing any Delta V right here. Is there a reason? Liquid fuel oxidizer. Is this not a... Oh, it's because... Yeah, let's go like this. There we go. Okay, we get that. That makes... We had our stages in the wrong place. Okay, so it's nothing to do with... That is the right kind of engine. And then I forget what I was going to say about all of that anyway. All right, so let's go ahead and... Oh, the Delta V map. In order to get into low Kerbal orbit, we're going to need, at a minimum, 3,400 Delta V. And again, the nice thing about Delta V is it doesn't matter how heavy your ship is, the calculation still works, right? So let's see what happens if we slap one of these guys on here. And then we come over to engines, and let's take a look. The swivel engine is awful nice because it gives you, once you get into the outer atmospheres where your aerodynamics start working less, this guy will gimbal. You might be able to read it there, 3 degrees of gimbal, which means that you can adjust the direction the ship is flying when you're in space much more easily than if you didn't have such a thing. And I'm thinking about something else. Because this ship is going to be pretty big, I think I want to disconnect it here. And let's go over to Command and Control. And I want to put a small inline reaction wheel. And that's going to give us a little bit of extra ability to control this ship. Well, when it's all busted up, it'll be way more than we actually need, I think. But it'll just give us a little more ability to turn the front of the craft while we're turning the back of the craft. So let's see, how much total delta V do we have in this ship? So if we come over here and look, we have 1,400, which is just not even nearly enough of the 3,400. Now keep in mind, depending on what happens here, we're going to lose some of that delta V because we're going to be fighting the atmosphere. But this is why, now we could do another thing. We can keep adding more and more fuel to this, right? Or what we can do is come up here, now to decoupling, and get a stack decoupler. And what I'm going to do is hit X, which will give me a mirrored image, right? If you can see them both. And then you don't even need to have the mirrored thing on. We're going to see what happens if we put two of these big solid rocket boosters, thumpers, on here. And try to get them lined up with that so they attach nicely to our decouplers, right? So now all of a sudden, let's zoom back out. We have a heck of a craft, right? So, and let's see, what did that do for our total delta V? That got us up to 3,400. So in other words, I don't think that this would be enough to get us there. What we can try to do is maybe, can we get it, like when you add more fuel, you're going to see you get this sort of, you know, you're going to add a lot of weight for the fuel. So we're going to be carrying more fuel up there. So it's not always a great solution just to add more of these tanks, right? So in other words, did we get 3,700? I mean, that could well be enough extra delta V. Now, if we come over to aerodynamics, at some point we get these nice aero nose cones. It adds to the mass, and it doesn't really show up that well in our calculations, but that will give us better aerodynamics. Now, I often question whether it's worth putting them on these solid rocket boosters because we would really try to be keeping our speed pretty low, right? Like we did before, we're going to come in here and our thrust to weight ratio when we start out is going to be 2.4. It's going to go all the way up to 6 almost. So what I want to do is I want to bring this down so that we don't end up going too fast, right? So we don't blast through the atmosphere. And, you know, I mean, you can get away with like 1.2 if you have enough control. The problem is, you know, if your aircraft isn't very stable and you're relying on fins, if you go up too slowly, you know, you're not going to really be able to control it because you're not going to be going quickly enough. So I'm turning this down to 65%, so we're going to get a lot less thrust out of it. We can see that our thrust is down lower and that we're going to be burning longer. So, you know, it's not like we have less fuel. We'll get the same delta V out of it. We'll just won't be punching through the atmosphere so fast, which should make us a bit more efficient. Now, we don't have to worry about that with this one because we're going to control the throttle, right? So then we have to decide, we could burn this engine while these are burning, or we could wait. So in other words, we could, you know, burn all three. That's what the space shuttle does, at least in part. You know, you'll have the rocket boosters still going, and this will be burning fuel. So they use all of the engines. Now, the advantage of doing that is we'd have a little more speed control, right? So, like, in other words, we could turn this down to, say, like 1 thrust-to-weight ratio, and then we would use some of our fuel in order to do that. Some of it's going to depend on the design of our rocket engine. So if we come over here, we'll say, well, this is the one we're using. You know, this one's not, you know, it's a fair amount better to use this one in vacuum. So I think we're kind of better off waiting if we can and just using our solid rocket boosters to get us up as high as we can and then going to the next stage. Right, now I do want to move these two stages together. So as soon as we decouple, we'll fire off this engine. Now we can throttle up, right? We can leave the throttle at 0 and do effectively, but at least the engine will be armed instantly. So depending on how it's going, we could choose and not have to hit the button twice. So now we want to go to this stage, which will be our final stage. Hopefully we don't need it to get into orbit. Hopefully we can get into orbit with this one. But I think we stand a fair chance of getting into orbit with this monstrosity. It's really not too bad other than this particular decoupler. Yeah, I mean, it's not pretty, but I think we stand a chance of getting into space. All right, so let's see how now it's going to cost us $8,800, and we're only going to return $2,800. But we also have these contracts where we'll get some money, right? Now, what is the note that we need? No vessel currently matching the parameters. Well, yeah, because nobody's in orbit. So I think that's. But it is important to look at these notes because sometimes they tell you the altitude or other things. But one other thing you do, and just so you make sure. I mean, some contracts can have other things, but the biggest thing is make sure you have the right vessel type usually, because if this wasn't a probe, we couldn't complete these contracts. And I have gotten into space and realized I didn't have, like sometimes it'll say you need a certain antenna or whatever else it is. If you don't have that, you're in trouble. All right, so we've got our delta V. We want to check it out throughout stage 2. Now it's telling our delta V will be 310, and that's good to note because it means if we want to stay in this 1.5 range, we probably want to have this engine at about half throttle, right? If we have it less than that, it'll be a problem. Now notice this one only has 0.72, which is okay because we couldn't take off from Earth, but it'll be enough to slow us down and speed us up, again, just to fine-tune our orbit and also maybe to spin us around and get us returning back to Kerbal or Earth. All right, there we go. I think I've talked enough. I think we're ready to go. Let us save this vehicle. Oh, I probably shouldn't have just saved that puncher. Well, it will be puncher 1. Anyway, we'll save it because if it doesn't work, at least we could make some fine-tuning adjustments to this. So do we have everything? Let's take a look. Another good thing to look at. Let's clear these milestones so we know if we get new ones. And our contract that was completed. This is our delta V information. Yeah, it's not, we don't see our. Yeah, so hopefully we have enough batteries. I don't really want to put solar. We've got enough stuff going on in that little craft. I don't want to put any solar panels. So hopefully we have enough electricity to do what we want. We're not going to use that much, but you can suck it up with doing maneuvering and all that kind of thing. So hopefully we'll be able to get up there and get back down. Let's see how it goes. Oh, we left the facility. We didn't hit launch. All right, let's go back into the facility. All right, try this again. All right, we have fins. We have everything I think we need. Our thrust is good. Let's try it again. Unable to launch. Uh-oh. All right, so what this is telling us is that you cannot have a vessel over 18 tons, and we are 22 tons. So we have to leave the facility again anyway. Do we have enough money? Oops. Yeah, this is kind of a new screen. Why is that? Yeah, new launch mission. I never really noticed going to this one. So let's close that. But I wanted to right click on this. And if you, oops. I guess we could change our view. Launchpad. Good. Upgrading only cost us $50,000, and we have $89,000. So if we want to launch this vessel, but it will get us up to quite a big boost in the size. If you see back, so we get a bigger size, a taller vessel, and also in this case, I think most important, a heavier vessel. So there we go. So now if you look, let's see if we can't zoom in some and head over there. We have a fancier launch pad. I think it might be better to see when we actually go to launch. You'll see that if you remember the way it used to look. So it's kind of cool that they have the graphics of upgraded. Even from here, it looks upgraded, right? So they did a nice job of those kind of things. All right, so now let's try to launch. And there we go. Now there's a couple things that we want to do before we actually take off. One, I want to use the stability assist. Some people don't use it so much. Hopefully we have that. And the other thing we want to do is take our throttle up. Remember we said we're going to have about 3 thrust to weight ratio. So what we want to do is when this guy goes to separate this stage, we'll have throttle on. Now we could take it down a little bit with a plan to up it, if that makes sense. So we'll just see what happens. Hopefully nothing hits. Let's put it that way. All right, so I think we are ready. Stability assist. All right, keep your fingers crossed. The other thing I want to say is we are going to try to turn to this 90-degree mark on the nav ball. So as we go up, we definitely want to see 90, and hopefully we can, I don't know how much stability this craft's going to have. These solid rocket boosters they're tough, they don't gimbal at all, and that really makes a big difference. So let's see what happens. And for that reason, by the way, we're going to try to just keep going up straight as best we can, maybe a little bit to the 90-degree side of things, but, that's not the most efficient launch, but at least we'll get up there, I hope. All right, so let's see what happens. All right. Once we get over maybe 100, we'll start getting a little more control in our speed. Probably, it keeps going up, but these wings will help us keep control. But as long as we're going up straight, I'm not going to mess with it too much. Now we're starting to lean a little bit to the opposite direction. So I'm just going to try to bring it back over this way a bit. All right, there we go. I don't want to do anything drastic. Now again, when we get up to about 10,000, it's not the worst time to start trying to turn to the 90, and then we might start, let's say, I really want to, that just did it on its own. So I'm using the controller to keep us somewhat straight. I did it the wrong way. This is getting to be a wild ride. Okay, calm. Good, nothing hit. Now we should have more control because we're using the gimbaling engine, right? It's not perfect. It's still fighting me. I want to get to a certain apoapsis there that's kind of like above 70, maybe even a little more. Now, as we start to turn down, now you're going to hit a point where we're getting closer to orbiting. There we go. And by the way, the more you can stay like a gradual turn, the better. That was quite a bit of craziness I had. And as we're going 45 degrees here, we're putting in, we want to start going around. We don't want to just go straight up, right? There we go. See how that just flipped? So now we're getting, close to where we would be able to get into an orbit. Potentially, but I need to get that apoapsis height above a certain amount, right? Above 70,000, or else we're not going to get out of the atmosphere. And you don't want the time to apoapsis, you don't want that to be too high. It means you're going up like too high too fast. There we go. So we're at 70, so I'm going to use my X button. Boom, just cut that off. Now I'm going to switch over to the map mode here, right? And I'll show you what we have. So what we want to do is tell this guy to go prograde, right? And that should flip our vessel around to pointing right at the prograde. We're letting this time, like we're going up, right? if we come back to, I wish you could see some more of these things, and I don't know how much you guys can actually see, but if we come back to the staging mode, you can see we're going up nicely. And when this gets down to a minute, I'm going to try to start burning like full throttle towards the prograde. So let's go back to this map mode, and you'll see what happens. Like, are we down to a minute? Yeah, pretty much close enough. Let's full throttle. So you can see this is spinning out. Now, as soon as this starts going too far away, I'm going to cut it down again. We could have probably waited a lot closer. And at some point, you're going to be able to do maneuver nodes. But if you can burn right on the apoapsis, that's your most efficient way of burning. So we can see that I still have the total delta V left in this stage is only 399. So we might have to use that final stage at that point. So let's go back over to toggle map mode. There we go. There's our vessel pointing in prograde. So again, we'll try to let this get down, maybe even down to 30 seconds this time, right? And you can see the problem is our periapsis, which is the smallest point, is still well into the earth, which is not a good thing. So if we come back here, we can see it up here, right? So we can fly from this map mode, which you'll often do, especially when you're in space. It's nice to see your vessel, but at the same time, it's also nice not to. So again, when we get more advanced, we'll be able to tell the computer to do some of these things, and maybe it'll be a little bit better, a little bit easier. But the closer you can burn to apoapsis is the more efficient way to change your periapsis. So how much burn time do we have? I want to burn right around it, the maximum. Well, right before it. Does it tell us here? No, not clearly. All right, we're down to 17 seconds. It's probably like close enough. There we go. So we're burned. Notice this apoapsis isn't changing as much. All right, so now what we need to do is come back to the staging. Let's eject this part of the craft. I'm going to turn the throttle way down. There we go, right? So we can turn the throttle up, but we need to activate this next stage. Right? And now we need to get this periapsis up, or else we're not going to get into orbit. So the whole thing's a waste if we don't. Now we have a lot lighter vessel, so hopefully this will work out. Yeah, we're doing pretty good. I'm going to give it pretty good throttle. We need to get that periapsis up. There we go. We're in orbit. Whoa, slow down. I could have hit the X to stop that. There we go, guys. We are in orbit. Let's go back to this. There we go. And our inclination, by the way, is that we were not quite straight. You know, we're dipping down. Do you see how this is lower and then this is kind of higher? If you get in the right, the perfect view in a sense. The moon is very much straight. So see how we're dipping down below a little bit here? And it will say over here, orbit. We can turn off vessel just to keep. See this inclination? We're not at 100%. So as we get more advanced, we're going to learn how to change that inclination so it's right in line with the moon's inclination. And then the other thing we can do eventually is set targets, and we'll be able to see what the difference in the inclination is and things like that. But we are in orbit, so let's take a look. Contract completed. Escape the atmosphere, so we can complete that. We have broken the land distance record. Very good. So the question I have now is, why have we... Oh, so we have to stay in orbit for 38 minutes, which should be no problem. We have a pretty good orbit. Now, we're not going to actually spend 38 minutes. We will warp time forward pretty shortly here. But if we want to change our periapsis here, it's best to burn, like I said, at the apoapsis, right? Apoapsis. But if we want to change the apoapsis, we want to burn at the periapsis. So normally when you want to burn to go to the moon or something, or just into a bigger orbit, it's actually better to burn at the periapsis to expand the size of your orbit, right? But you can do it from either, and you can really do it from anywhere, but you're just talking about what's the most efficient. Now, if they're both practically the same, like these aren't too much difference, then, you know, it's not going to make a massive difference if we were to burn at the periapsis, though, you know, it is better to burn at one or the other to get more efficient. Good. Now, by the way, the eccentricity is like how it's like an egg shape, or is it a perfect circle? So inclination is our relative position, you know, like relative to the equator. We're off by this many degrees from being straight with the equator. What else is there here? Well, the angle to prograde, angle to retrograde. I don't really ever use that. I think that is maybe like this angle, like we're 56 to 156 off. I don't know if that makes sense or not. All right, well, let's fast forward some time until we get that contract met. Now, we also want to keep an eye on our, see, we're using electricity, and the reason we are is because we're trying to stay. We don't want to run out of electricity because we don't have any solar cells, but we still have a good amount, right? But what we could do is like turn off the SAS if we slowed time back down. Like you really don't need that SAS on, and turning that off. Yeah, see, now we're using like almost no electrical charge. So we have 19 minutes left. Look, it put us into a spin. Now we can stop that spin manually. All right, sometimes. Now what we're actually going to want to do is burn retrograde. So there we go. But we can just let it spin around until we're ready to go. But the other thing we probably want to do, let's go back and toggle the map mode and look at our vessel. And I want to conduct all our science. Perform all science. And then we're going to, we don't get any for atmospheric pressure scan. You would think we'd get something. No temperature scan. And no telemetry. So we didn't get any science for any of that? That's a bummer. You would think we would have got science for being in orbit. Bummer. Well, we'll have to get some science on the way back down. Plus, we'll get some science for completing those things. But at least we tried, right? So now let's fast forward time, and you'll see we spin around pretty good. But I'm going to keep an eye until that contract's met. And I think we have plenty of fuel. It doesn't really matter when we burn. So if you've ever heard the term when they talk about it, like if you ever watch much space stuff, we're going to do a re-entry burn, which is actually going to be to turn retrograde, you know, opposite of our flow, and then burn. There we go. So we've completed another contract. Set time back to 1. And then I am going to put the SAS back on and say, go to retrograde, right? So what that did is this is the direction that we're facing. Well, we're, you know, the ship, you know, the front of the ship, the top of the ship as we launched it is pointing in prograde now, but the engine is, the direction we're facing now is retrograde. So when we burn this, it's going to slow us down and it's going to return us, it's going to lower this periapsis or apple. It really depends on where you're at. Let's come over here. I'll explain that. So like we're just past the periapsis, right? And we're heading over to the apoapsis. If we burn, you're basically going to start bringing down this portion of the thing. Now, once we get below atmosphere, eventually we might skip off the atmosphere, but if we try to come in too shallow, but at the same time, if we bring this down to like say 25,000, right? To this, the periapsis ends up being 25,000, we're going to hit enough atmosphere that it's going to bring us the rest of the way in. So let's do that. And you'll see this apoapsis, you'll see these start to change and spin around. Can I zoom in and kind of get you guys a good view? Well, this is a good view. So I'm going to try to get this down to say about 25,000. So I'm going to just turn on a little bit of throttle and you'll see the numbers start coming down. There's no hurry. You don't have to do full throttle or anything. You can do a nice relaxing burn. And as long as we can get these down below, you can see that periapsis is spinning around because we're actually changing this portion of the flight, right? We want to see, hopefully we have enough fuel to get this down to, yeah, there we're below 70, so we're guaranteed to hit Kerbin eventually. And if we can get it down to 25, that should be a nice, yeah, just a nice place to be. Can we zoom out? There you go. See, we're not quite down to where we would hit the Earth. How much fuel do we have? We can keep an eye on it here. Yeah, we got plenty of fuel. And if we turn the vessel back on, it'll tell us how much delta V we still have left and how much. So we're down to 36. We're barely burning this engine anyway. And anywhere around here is pretty good. I'm sure that there's more expert people, but I found this to be pretty darn reasonable. So there we go. So let's see, can we open these bay doors? Do they make any difference in us collecting science? We don't want to do seismometer. Let's log the pressure data. Oh. Yeah, see, we're not getting any science for recovery from either transmitting it or not, you know? And then we're just going to reset this because I really didn't want to do those. So what we'll do is I'll close these doors again, and then we'll wait till we get back down. So, all right, so now the bottom of the ship is facing retrograde. So if we speed up time a little bit here. Now, by the way, I clicked, if you notice, 100 times, but because we're so close to Kerbin, it only lets you do that. Now, once we get to a certain point, once you get to 70,000 when we're near the atmosphere, now one of the reasons, what we'll do now is we're going to eject that next portion, right? So in other words, we're going to decouple. Boom. Whoa. I don't know what that was all about, but there we go. So I don't know where that went, but we might hear an explosion later on, but we decoupled that, so now you can see our heat shield there. I don't know, is that it way up there? It doesn't normally do quite that dramatically the things. So we'll see. This is kind of an odd-shaped vessel to come back in nicely. How is our power done? Yeah, we have plenty of power, so I'm not too worried about the fact that the SAS is on, but often when you come in, this is a problem. Now, the other thing is we haven't activated this parachute yet, so we're going to want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click the next stage. Now, notice nothing happened, right? It's too high. You might have seen that note. So in other words, it's not going to actually deploy the little initial chute until we're below 3,000 meters. So since this is our first time, I would like to sort of show what happens. But we're going to start, as we get into this darker blue part, we're going to start seeing that we're in a lot more atmosphere. So this should start turning red pretty shortly. Now, if your vessel is designed correctly, you don't necessarily need this SAS on. Like if we turned it off, it should fly right, but there's always the chance that this thing will flip around and go the other way, just because of the shape of it. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And once that does flip around, then you're just kind of, there's not much you can do to flip it back the other way. We have no motors. We are really just like a fancy rock falling from the sky at this point. Yeah, normally I might speed through some of these things. You'll see. After you play for a while, you get to the point that you've seen it re-enter enough times. But it's always pretty cool and dramatic if you're a patient type of person. And the other thing we can do, let's turn off orbit because we're no longer in orbit. And we can turn on this heat. And the heat's pretty cool because you'll see this, you'll see how close you actually get, and it'll tell you like what the hottest part is. Like we may see that these flight computers start getting awful hot. It sort of depends, I'm sure, on the modeling of the game. But so right now the heat shield is taking most of the heat, which is a good thing. And this is, you've probably seen this in some space show, re-entry and all that. Now the problem is the heat may not, just because the heat shield's the hottest part, these things may fail at a lower temperature, right? Which would not necessarily be a good thing. Hopefully whatever explodes doesn't, if you do get an explosion, it doesn't blow your whole vessel up. Now notice the battery, rechargeable battery, which is safely tucked in there, is nice and cool. And like I said, hopefully the heat shield stays the critical part. Now there's also, there used to be, can we still, yeah, a blader. You can reduce the cost of this if you know you're not going to use all of this. So we probably could have turned this down some. It sort of depends on how fast you plan on coming in. So we're going to waste some money because our blader, we had it all the way at 50. And we probably didn't need it anywhere near that high. I think 25 would have probably been enough. And saved us a couple bucks in the meantime. So I can tell just because our orbit, just because of the orientation, we're definitely getting into this dark blue part. So now we're probably at the most critical point in the whole thing. Now you notice it's taken us quite a while. If we had put our retrograde periapsis lower, we wouldn't be spending so much time in this zone, but the heat would be more intense during that time. So you kind of want to find, again, the nice balance of, you know, not too much heat, but at the same time, you know, you do want to get down where you're not spending 4 years in this particular zone. But we're in real good shape. That's a nice, in my opinion, nice gentle re-entry. We're burning off the speed. Now notice our speed is going down. That's really what we're trying to do here, right? We're really trying to reduce that speed. And as we reduce our speed, you can see we're starting to fall a little bit more. So our path is changing. Now how are we doing? Yep, still plenty of electrical charge. And if you notice, we're really getting to the point where this is going to go away, like about 1,000. And we still have, if we look here, 44 ablator. Like, I don't even think we're going to use 5 of that ablator. Like, so if we had put it on 25, we would have been fine. I just didn't think of it until the last minute there. So there we go. So we're pretty much through the worst. You'll look at your temperatures coming down nicely, and we're going much, much slower than we were. And, you know, let's fast forward time a little bit here just for the sake of not going too long with the episode. So once we get down to about 6,000, I'll put that back to ×1 so we can see the parachutes deploy. 8,000, close enough. It takes it a minute, well, not a minute, but it takes it a few seconds to slow the speed down kind of thing. And then once we get the parachutes open, we'll definitely... It takes a long time to float from 700. Not long time, but certainly test your patience slightly to go from 700 meters at like 10. And by the way, that's about the most you ever want to... Oh, what happened? Why didn't... That did it again the same way. No. I've done that before. Why didn't that activate? Because I was too high? They must have... something's changed with that. Because in the past, that would have worked. Oh, that's a bummer. We lost the ship. Not the end of the world. Oh, what I'm saying, recover vessel. Okay. Yeah, catastrophic failure was the outcome. But not really. We got our 2 contracts done. So let's head over to the Space Center. And then sometimes what you can do, depending on, I have no idea where we came down, but we can get out of this mode. And if we go to tracking, no, that's not tracking. Yeah, go to tracking here. Sometimes you'll see the vessel on the map over here. Like, I'm not sure where we might have landed, but no, it would usually be like a teardrop shape if there was a vessel, so you can recover vessels from this tracking screen here. All right, well, very good. We got something into orbit. We need to work on our parachute technique, I think. Let's see what that gave us in terms of science. Not that much. I'm disappointed that we couldn't do science up there. I really expected to be able to do science while in orbit, and we couldn't. So I want to look into that. But we got a little bit more research and development. I don't think it's enough to really get us We're not going to be able to get to the next stage, but at least we know we can get that. Maybe we can, look at our contracts. Yeah, we completed. These are the archives, so we can see we completed those if you ever want to see that. And we can take a look at what's available. Now, are there any more? We come over here is also a good way to do it. So we can go for a manned record, or we can orbit and recovery. So this is a little bit, and then recover it from the surface of Kerbin. So if we had tried to do this one before, we would have failed because our parachute didn't open. But we could probably resend the same exact vessel up and get this one done, right? Because we know we can get into orbit with it, and then we'll know that we can come back down. And maybe we can try to figure out why we didn't get any science while we were up there, right? Now, that could be because I turned off those contracts. So it might be that I misunderstood how you were getting science from around the planet. So there are some mods that tell you where you can get science, and I might even go ahead and get us one of those. Oh, we can take a look at the flagpole. Oh, yeah, look. Oh, we can change our flag if we want it. Now, we already got the favorite flag. Yeah, so I might even add there's like science now or something it's called, and it will tell us all the science we can get, and it helps you just know where you can get more science. Anyway, guys, I have no idea how long this episode is, but I feel like it's long enough, and we accomplished our goal for this week. We have put a man into orbit, or a satellite into orbit, so we are at least even with the Russians and Sputnik at this point. So Reverstan is now a proud space agency officially, right? Because once you launch a probe into space, I think you can call yourself a space agency. So a glorious day for the Republic. So I hope you guys have once again enjoyed the video. The next video will be next Tuesday if you are watching this anytime within the release date. If not, I'm sure you will be able to jump right till next Tuesdays. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.